The Michael movie reminded me how big Off the Wall was. In some ways, we kind of underrated. And that's only because Thriller was so big. Like, Thriller had, what, like 7 top 10 hits? And Off the Wall had 4. And just like Thriller was a culture pusher, Off the Wall did the same thing. I remember, like, I was in 5th grade, and there's these group of girls every lunchtime who would put their desks together, and they would play Off the Wall, the full album, just for an hour. And it's like, at first it was cool. It was like, oh man, rock with you. I want to rock with you. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I hate this song. But they played it every day. But that album is fantastic. And I start asking the question, was Michael Jackson's Off the Wall the first great post-disco album? Because Saturday Night Fever came out in 1977. And I love the Bee Gees, and I love Chic, and I love Donna Summer. There's a lot of great things about disco. And those guys who hated disco, those disco demolition dudes, my theory about them has always been either they had no rhythm, couldn't dance, or they just evil people. Because how can you hate disco? But when you start thinking about Off the Wall, it's 1979, 2 years removed from Saturday Night Fever. And Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson, because they met on the Wiz, crafted an album that had disco-like strings, but was totally different from an R&B sense. And again, this is the world where we still got Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind, and Fire, and they were doing their thing as well. But Off the Wall didn't sound like anything that was out at that time. And part of it was Michael Jackson because he was crafting some songs at his home. Another part is also Quincy Jones because he was the main producer of this. And then you had Rod Temperton. Rod Temperton was a big influence as a songwriter. Rod Temperton from Heat, who made some great songs, wrote some great songs. And you put that trifecta together along with some of the other players, and they just crafted one of the greatest sounding records of the late 70s. And if all that Michael Jackson did was Off the Wall and never made Thriller, that would have been a huge achievement by himself. He goes off and he works with his brothers again. They go on tour. They make that album. They give us Heartbreak Hotel, another great album. And when you think about it, Off the Wall was 1979 and Thriller was 1982. That's like, how many years is that? That's like 3 years. Like this, that's 3 years. That's 3 years. So if you're Michael Jackson, you hit with Off the Wall, and he didn't even go on tour of Off the Wall. It was 1979. He has his hit album. He goes back to his brothers, which I don't think he really wanted to do, but he did it. He makes Heartbreak Hotel. They go on tour. It's fantastic. And then they make Thriller, and 3 years is a long time. And then he makes an album that sounds totally different from Off the Wall, and it's bigger than the last album. It's simply amazing, man. And let's get some love to Bad, because Bad is almost like Off the Wall. Where Bad, it was a huge album in its own right. The only problem with Bad was it wasn't Thriller. If you take Thriller away, if all Michael Jackson had was Off the Wall and Bad, that's still a tremendous career. If you take Thriller out of it. Because all those songs were great. It's just that Thriller was the 800-pound gorilla that everybody loved. But that's where you get the debate, like, what's the better album? Like Thriller or Off the Wall? And some people just feel like Off the Wall is the more pure album. When you listen to the vocals of Off the Wall, and I love Thriller. But when you hear Michael Jackson's vocals on Off the Wall, he was like, what, 21, I think? Or something like that. There's a joyfulness in his song, in his music. There's a joyfulness in his vocals, and he's still borrowing vocal stylings from Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder. You hear it. You kind of hear it like early on PYT, because I think they probably made PYT towards the beginning of Thriller. But Off the Wall, you hear like the Stevie Wonder influence on his vocals. You hear really the Marvin Gaye influence on his vocals. And it's fantastic. So go next time you have a chance, just sit down and just listen to Off the Wall. Just play in the background and just hear that wonderful production and that wonderful songwriting. And I really do think because of Thriller, we've underrated like how great that album was. And to be honest, it's hard to say that Off the Wall was the first great post-disco album, but I think it is. So my question to you is, what is your favorite song off of Off the Wall? What do you think is the most underrated song off of Off the Wall? And what is your favorite between Off the Wall and Thriller? Which one is your favorite? Can I say Dangerous? Can I split the baby and say Dangerous? Which was also a good album that's really underrated. MJ was so good.